between Australian Wool Innovation, Queensland Government and AgForce. Today will be from two people. Firstly, we're Ninian and Stewart-Moore, a producer from the Hughenden area. Ninian's been using Maremmas for the last few years now and has been using them quite successfully. And also Lee Allen from Biosecurity Queensland. Lee's done a lot of research into guardian dogs and has been working with Ninian up on his property some new research. So we'll be hearing from both of them today. So without anything more from me, I'll pass it over to Ninian to hear his presentation today. Thanks, Ninian.
Alex. Good day, everyone. Yeah, it's coming up 10 years since we first introduced Maremma dogs to our sheep flock, and down that path we've learnt a lot and made a lot of mistakes, and I'm still not sure that we're sort of doing everything as well as we possibly can do it. So there's still a lot to learn as well. But I'll just run through pretty quickly what just the history of what we've done and a few of the things that we've learned, and yeah, just go from there. So I'll kick off, and hopefully this slideshow thing will work. There we go. Hang on too quickly. So it's an old idea and a new concept. There's over or around 13 guard dog breeds around the world, and Maremma is just one of those. And they've been used in the US for over 3 decades, and they've done a lot of research with them over there. And by the time that we found out about them, the only real information that there was available was really from the States. And we chose Maremmas just because they were readily available, and there seemed to be more of them around, and people knew more about them in Australia than the other breeds. But that was just the way it went. And that breed is over 2,000 years old, and they breed pretty true because of that. So their instincts are fairly well ingrained. They were first introduced into Australia during the 1980s. There's just a picture of some of our team that was half a dozen years ago, probably now. At shearing time, actually we sort of bring them all in and just give them a bit of R&R, and they get a bit of manicure and worming tablets and that sort of thing, and they go back to the paddock when the sheep go back out again. So in 2001, our property, 46,500 hectares, we were running 20,000 merinos, 4,000 cattle at the time, and the dogs were just decimating our flock, and we were going out and seeing damage on a daily basis. And that year we estimated up to 15% of our flock was lost to predators, which was pretty huge. And not only that, the stress and the lack of wool growing and the lack of lambs and all that sort of thing was pretty horrific. So we were seriously considering getting out of sheep like everyone else was at the time. That was the problem, and there were plenty of them around, and that one was probably chased down in a vehicle and in the open country. So yeah, they were just coming in droves. In 2002, the baiting program wasn't working. There weren't enough participants. There were too many wild dogs. And the reasons for that are many, and it wasn't only this region, it was, as everyone knows, probably around Australia. And the dog numbers were building. We'd heard the name Maremma, and so we looked it up on the internet, and that led to us getting in touch with a breeder in Victoria. And over the next few months, we went for 2 trips down there and brought 24 of them home, and then started the big learning curve. And the answer was to integrate and bond these dogs, which it's not an accident. I think they're the same size, shape and colour as a sheep, so they blend in pretty well to the flocks, and that started, it took a while to kick in, but that became the answer for us. It cost us about $20,000 in the beginning. We spent a lot of money on our initial dogs and getting them desexed and getting them back here and learning how to deal with them and building the feeding stations and all those sorts of things. But yeah, we reckon our money came back within a year because the sheep deaths stopped. We reckon it costs us between 30 and 50 cents a sheep a year to run our team of Maremmas, and that varies, but depending whether you're breeding your own pups or buying them and that sort of thing. But it's probably cheaper than any sheep drench anyway, and so what we spend on our husbandry is just a little more than what it might be if we weren't spending that money. Initially there was a big time factor while we learnt about them and we got them settled in, but basically now they become part of our normal routine, and they do take a bit of time, but anything worthwhile takes a bit of time. There's a couple of graphs here that we did up, probably it only goes to 2008, so they're about 3 years old, but they do show that we had quite significant losses, most of which was down to wild dogs, and then once we stopped the wild dogs coming in, our losses got back to pretty normal sort of numbers. And although I would suggest that maybe 2011 that number started to increase a bit, because there are just still a heck of a lot of wild dogs about, and we probably have less sheep, less Maremmas. We just haven't got as good a setup as we did have 2 or 3 years ago when we had more Maremmas. And the reason we've got less Maremmas probably is because our original ones are getting older, and we haven't been replacing them maybe as fast as we should have. So I think we've got a little bit below the threshold of the numbers that we probably need to have at the moment, but we're addressing that. So how they work, they create a territory. It's a dog territory. They're very nocturnal by habit. The Maremmas tend to sort of and take it easy during the day, and at night they're up and about, and they're out with the stock grazing and doing all the patrolling, and because it tends to be when wild dogs are during the night or early in the morning when they're out and about. They're large dogs, their large physical presence and a deep loud bark probably helps their protection. They tend to, as we observed with Lee, went out looking to see what they were doing one night, they tend to be herding the sheep away from any perceived danger. And they're a very big, strong dog, and they're very quick when they want to be. Just next slide. I won't dwell on these much. I've just got a couple of quick maps of our property and some of the collaring work that Lee was doing of our Maremmas, but you can just see that during the course of a period of time they do spread around and scatter, and they stay with the livestock, and a few places there it's over a period of time where the stock have been moved from different paddocks, and they go where the stock are, living an easier life for her, and she made that decision. And we found that her influence there really sort of was a very calming influence on the sheep in the feedlot, and I think it did help their weight gains. Pretty hard to quantify that, but just an observation. This Maremma management, this is an area that we've basically developed a best practice manual out of over the last couple of years, and I've been fairly adamant about getting a lot of this right, because I think there are a lot of horror stories out there of things going wrong, of Maremmas don't work, and they do this and they do that. And just yesterday I heard another one of someone said, oh, those Maremmas, they've been known to jump up at the back of the ute and kill kelpies. I said, all right, well, I hadn't heard that one before. But anyway, I think there's a lot to be learned from getting the management of them right, and I found that last story a bit hard to believe. But anyway, but you've got to be certain of sound genetics. I mentioned earlier about the age of the breed. They've been around for a long time, and they breed pretty true. A fellow rang once and said he's got a blue heel, a Maremma cross. It looks just like a Maremma. What should he do with it? Well, it might have looked all right, but I'm sure its instincts were fairly mixed up. So that's probably part of a lot of problem of where there have been things go wrong with Maremma management is that the genetics probably weren't as pure as they should have been. So it's a pretty important factor. And point 2 there, definitely desexing all free-range guard dogs. We have no control over what they do out there, and they make their own decisions 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And yeah, to me it's just absolutely crazy to let entire males or females running free range, because the risk of them interbreeding with any wild dog or any other sort of working dog that strays or whatever, it just isn't worth it. And it's a lesson we learned right at the start. I believe it's a very essential part of Maremma management. And point 3 there, sound bonding to livestock. It's absolutely the key to getting it right. You need to know where they are, and if they're bonded to your animals, you know where to find them. As our Maremmas have got older, they are less concerned about being with the exact animal that they started with, but so sometimes they go from mob to mob, but they are always with one of our mobs of sheep, and if you can't find them, well, go looking at another mob of sheep. But the bonding is critical to getting it right, and point 4 there, don't over-humanise the pups. It's a really fine balance of getting it right, of being able to manage the dogs, but not have them want to be with you. The old adage of dog being man's best friend goes out the window. You want to be the facilitator, and they want to be best friends with your livestock. So that's another important factor, and just getting that right. The first few weeks of a pup's life is pretty important, that they imprint with animals out in the paddock and not with humans in a shed or something. And then the first 7 months is probably the most critical in that pup's life, of getting to understand what it's supposed to be doing. And then the first 12 months, you've got to monitor closely what's going on, and make sure that they're not getting out of hand and playing too much with sheep or whatever, because that can happen. And we've had instances of pups growing up in the same litter, and then their habits change once they start to mature, and some pups are perfect, and some pups get the wrong end of the stick and think that they can play with the sheep and chase them and that sort of thing. Well, you just got to monitor that and make sure it doesn't happen. And you've got to provide adequate food. We have dog feeding stations out there. We just use a fairly low protein level working dog biscuit, and it provides their full dietary requirement. We do give them beef from time to time, and that's more like a contact thing, excuse me, than anything else. So, but it's a good to give them something to chew and something to go for. Getting that balance of humanisation is important. If you can go to a mob of sheep, find a Maremma with them, and they will come over to you, or you go to them, and they have a pat, and then they're just as happy to go off and go back to their sheep. That is the ideal balance for getting that humanisation part right. You can then deal with any injuries or husbandry you need to without too much drama. There's some pups there, and this is one of the problems. They are cute and cuddly when they're little, and people tend to spend too much time with pups, and that does upset their future understanding of what they're supposed to be doing. So feeding and health, I've mentioned that ad-lib dog biscuits, when available, are available all the time in a suitable feeding station, remembering that dog biscuits have restricted animal material in them, and they should not be available to ruminants, so you have to do a setup that neither sheep nor cattle can actually get access to those biscuits. We feed beef when available. We worm regularly every 3 months or so. We use a prop antel, which is does roundworms, woodworms, hookworms, tapeworms, hydatis. Doesn't do heartworm, but we try and get them about 4 times a year as much as we can. They lie in troughs and mud holes, and their long coats get fairly daggy from time to time, so you need to get the dagging shears out and trim them up a bit every now and again. And in our soft country, our horses' hooves grow long and dogs' toenails grow long too, so we give them a bit of a clip. Go through all those points. There's a feeding station. We've found sometimes we've had to put a couple of sheep panels and a V in front of that so that the dogs have to go underneath and then come up to get in there, especially if they're weaner heifers or cattle are in the paddock that tend to stick their head in and get the bickies. There's just a black tub in there that'll hold a whole bag, and we just keep them topped up as we go around. That was after mustering one day. We'd mustered, put some sheep in a lane and collected the 4 Maremmas and taking them home for a bit of R&R. Bonding with cattle, it's the same as sheep. I can't suggest many different cattle. He had a bit of concern with older cows being a bit too protective, and we haven't gone on with that. So we're still just attempting to run a couple of Maremmas with our young cattle. These couple of pups here were out working with these maiden heifers at 8 months of age. Very happy. They stayed, those 2 pups, or 3 of them actually, stayed with that mob of heifers for over 12 months before they decided that they were getting a bit too strong for them, and a couple of them left and went to live with sheep because they'd been bonded with both. So in summary, our losses from predators reduced down to almost zero. It's not zero, but we're still experiencing a few losses here and there, but it's at a point that we can live with, and we know we can improve on it. Our livestock are much less stressed. Our kangaroo numbers have reduced dramatically. We never had a huge number in the first place, and I don't think that they alone are an answer to a kangaroo problem, but it was just one of the side benefits that we were rewarded with. We get a good night's sleep. We never used to get a good night's sleep when we knew our sheep were being slaughtered on a daily basis. And at this stage, our flock gets pretty much full protection, and there's really nothing that there's no inputs from the government department. We do get involved in the baiting programs, with baiting our boundaries with neighbours. Our shire has a wild dog levy that costs us $1,600 to $1,700 a year, which goes towards the baiting program in the area. But we don't bait on our property because we just can't at this point. And that is a problem, an issue that we need to deal with down the track. We have a peace of mind. A couple of Maremmas just camped up late in the afternoon with some sheep. You know that that photo was taken 25 kilometres from the homestead. You can go home that night and you think, well, those sheep aren't going to get eaten, because that line of hills in the background, the basalt wall, is a perfect breeding ground for wild dogs. So my vision for the future is that livestock guardian animals will be accepted as an alternative, and that maybe, hopefully, we might see a turnaround in sheep numbers in the pastoral zone. And all species of domestic livestock can be protected by these dogs. You just need to work through the process from the start when the pups are little. There are less stressed humans and animals around. And I've just put a point at the bottom there that when the PAP chemical, and Lee might have some comments on this later too, and the ejectors, cyanide or whatever chemical we might be able to get registered, become available, I think that we could integrate them into our property by bringing the guard dogs in for a week or two or a couple of weeks, going to set up tied up baits with PAP and or using ejectors, and maybe get rid of some problem wild dogs, and then go and clean all that up and put the guard dogs back out. But I wouldn't be going to do that with 1080 at this point in time. Anyway, that's it from me. Thank you, and I don't know, you got to keep questions till later, Alex, or where do we go?
No, if anyone's got any questions now, we can, for Ninian, we can have them now. So you should see a little hand symbol on the right-hand side of your screen if you wanted to click that if you did have a question, and raise your hand and we can unmute you to ask the question. So are there any questions from anyone? Guy, you got a question? Guy Neil?
Yeah, g'day Alex and Ninian. Just wondering if there's a sites that producers can go to and get a list of Maremma breeders that are, I guess got some sort of certification or some sort of, that they can have confidence in them in selecting an animal from them?
Look, no, there isn't at this point in time, but it's a really good question, and it's something that has been in my mind a number of times, that it would be really good to have a register of breeders, but no, there isn't at this point. But yeah, there are some reputable ones out there, and that I know of, and there's probably some very reputable ones that I don't know of too. But yeah, there's another stage in all of the sort of maybe the breeding and regulation thereof of guardian animals, because their instincts are so different to other working dogs that the breeding side of it people need to know what they're doing. And actually this week's Country Life had a Maremma Bull Mastiff cross pups for sale, and I thought, gee whiz, something you really don't want to see. So good question. No, there's not, and yeah, it's something I think we need to work on.
All right, thanks, Guy. Ninian, there's a question here that's come through from someone. I bought a Maremma some 3 to 4 years ago, not realising that it had a bad habit, selecting a certain animal, cutting it out of the flock, and then keeping it out. It then taught a new pup the same habit. I separated the dogs, run them with their own flock, but know that it still happens occasionally. Will they grow out of this? What are your thoughts on that?
Probably not. There's maybe using electric collars or something. If you can bring a dog in and put it in a smaller paddock and observe it and catch it doing what it's doing, and you might be able to break its habit by doing something like that. We've had the same sort of issue. Unfortunately, we destroyed the dog, and it may be the only answer. There are some pretty hard decisions to be made from time to time, but yeah, the collars, the electric collars, are probably worth a try.
Yep. All right. Another one. Ninian, do the dogs tend to stay with their original sheep that they were bonded to, or do they float around a bit between the different mobs? It's from John Milne.
Yeah, John, g'day. Initially, yes. In the beginning, we found they were very dedicated to the mob you bonded them with, and probably for the first 1, 2, 3, 4 years, whatever, they were very dedicated. Then some of ours started to not, I suppose, as we, like with the mob of Weathers, we've had a couple of Maremmas there with Weathers now for 10 years, but we don't have Weathers over 4 years old, so they've probably been through about 3 cycles of Weathers. But we actually, 2 of those Maremmas have stayed there the whole time, and one bloke's been there for 10 years. Yeah, as of today. But as they've got older, they don't seem to mind. We've found that, oh geez, we might swap these around, or we've got some new pups coming on, and we've been able to pick up some dogs out of one paddock and take them and put them in another paddock with another mob of sheep, and they've been happy to stay there. But younger dogs, not so much, but the older ones that have just got wiser and haven't minded swapping around as much as, but I think it's pretty critical for young dogs to try and give them that continuity, and then they will probably be more likely to stay on your property with your sheep. I don't know how they know that, but they seem to.
Righto. There's just a couple of comments there saying that the Canine Control Council Queensland website may have a list of registered Maremma breeders, which is www.ccq.org.au, and also possibly dogsonline.com. Often have Maremma pups listed. That's just following on from where to source them from. There's another question here from Mark Hughenden. How do you stop young dogs from returning home once put out alone with bonded sheep to the main mob?
Sorry, Alex, could you say that again? There's a question, please.
How do you stop young dogs from returning home once put out alone with bonded sheep?
The best tool we found was a stock whip, and when they turned up at home, we'd crack the whip at them and tell them to go home, which is all back to front, to go back out in the paddock, and we did a fair bit of that, chasing them away from the homestead with a stock whip. And as soon as they turned up, we'd either pick them up and put them in a vehicle and take them straight back out. They didn't get a feed, they didn't get a good reception, but the best way was, and it's pretty harsh too, I suppose, but we'd chase them with a stock whip and send them back out in the paddock, and it worked. There's that Mark Hughenden that went to Marcus Island quite a long number of years ago, I suppose, from what Halloween.
Possibly. Well, another question as far as culling. How many Maremmas do you cull?
How many?
Yes. Do you cull any?
Over the time, with a litter of pups, is that what it means?
The question was just simply how many Maremmas do you cull?
Yeah, well, two parts to that, I suppose. With a litter of pups, they tend to show a little bit of pink pigment from time to time on noses and paws, and we have kept one Maremma that had a pink line along the hairline on the nose, and the poor little girl's been sunburnt and peeling on that bit of pink pigment for the whole of her life. That's just in pups, I suppose. We just look at, as you would with any sort of litter of pups, I suppose, look for any abnormalities, and that pink pigment's pretty important to look for, but that may not be in all genetics. Through the bonding or through the growing up process and the bonding process and the getting them started out in the paddock process, we might have had to cull 10 or 15% or so of what we've bred or bought.
Righto, very good. There is a question from Adam Grieve. I'll just unmute you, Adam, and then you can ask Ninian your question. All right.
Good day, Ninian. Ninian, what sort of a ratio of dogs to sheep do you have there?
Yeah, Adam, good question. We started off with about 1 per 1,000 or 2 or 3 per mob. I still don't know the exact right answer to that, and it's going to vary a lot, but I believe that 2 to 3 to a mob is a good number. In some smaller instances, you might get away with not having that many, or not having every mob that actually has some. But yeah, the ratio of numbers is probably more to a mob than to an actual number. I mean, we'd run 3 Maremmas with 3,000 wethers, or 3 with 1,000 sort of thing. But I think you need 2 or 3 because actually the fellow that you see on that, thank you, any questions there, we found him dead in the paddock. He was one of the collared dogs, and he used to live on his own a lot, and Lee's collaring work showed that there had been at least one wild dog in the vicinity just a couple of days before he died, and we're suspecting that maybe he might have been attacked by a group of wild dogs. So one on their own is I don't think ever a good idea, but yeah, so 2 or 3 per mob is the best answer I can give you.
A follow-up to that, Ninian, is when you're bonding them, would you bond a couple of dogs together or bond them singly? Somebody suggested to me 2 dogs together bonding makes them want to are more likely to play with each other than bond with the sheep. Yeah,
that's a good question, and a bit each way with that. I've experienced that as well. Where but we have tried to bond 2 or 3 or 4 out of a litter and split them up maybe into 2s and 3s and bond them together. It in some ways helps the glue to stay, for them to stay with the mob, and that also brings out the thought that do you just introduce new pups altogether as a group into a mob of sheep without older dogs being there, or do you then bring an older dog in and involve them in the bonding process as well? A bit of both will work, but we found a couple of times that just 2 or 3 pups out of the same litter all bonded together and all put out together, and that has been reasonably successful as well. So yeah, probably just got to watch what's happening and go with either way, I think.
Okay, thanks, Nathan.
All right, thanks, Adam. We might keep on moving and get Lee Allen to do his presentation. Just another couple of comments from Peter Lynch, who I assume has got Maremmas as well. He agrees with you about the stock whip comment as far as them coming back to the house and using the stock whip, and also he likes to use at least 2 per mob when it comes to Maremmas. So just a couple of comments there from Peter, who I assume also has Maremmas. Right, there's a few other questions, but we might just leave them, if we can, until the end, and we'll thank Ninian for that presentation and ask Lee Allen to talk to him about some of his research that he's done. So thanks a lot, Ninian.
Okay, no worries.
Okay, well, thank you. A number of years ago when we started in 2009 looking at how guardian dogs worked and how they interact with wild dogs in order to be able to know how to manage them better and understand what they did and how they went about it. So in 2009 we put some GPS transmitters on eight of Ninian's Maremmas, and they recorded 30-minute locations. And so here's some of the data which Ninian's shown part of before, and what this indicates is that some of these Maremmas, like Nunzio out here, who looked after a mob of sheep on his own, and there's others in here, like there's 2 or 3 Maremmas that work together, remain very faithful to the flock and the paddocks which they're assigned to. Yet there's others like this fellow here, who obviously moves around and travels through into these Maremmas are actually sort of floaters, as Ninian often refers to them as, that don't do so. So just to show you a bit, this is the Flinders River that runs around the top of the screen, and Dunluce, the homesteads in here, with the Townsville Mount Isa road running through here, so that they come up for shearing in there. So a number of these dogs, as they've been brought up, you'll see the odd point come in there. But you can see how some of them are moving around. We put satellite transmitters on 5 dingoes that we caught on the edge of the property, and here again is the Flinders River that runs through here, and the basalt wall which Ninian referred to in his presentation. This area in here basically encloses all the locations of where the Maremmas are, and so you quickly see that dingoes are not being prevented from coming into the area where the sheep are. In fact, that some of them are spending a very uncomfortable and inordinate amount of time in amongst them. And if we look at some of the data that we get from there, they travel, and some of these dogs have made repeated visits. And see there the scale bar, are repeated visits of 15, 20 kilometres out across that open downs country to be in and around where the sheep and Maremmas are. So this hatched area there is basically going from outside of where the Maremmas have been. So it's a sort of a traversed area polygon in there. And then that was fairly common for all of the dogs that we travel. This dog here has denned and produced pups down in here, or been associated with a produced pups down on the edge of the river. Here, between mid-July and mid-September, we've made 9 different forays of over 20 kilometres travelling out across the downs to actually be in and around where the sheep and the Maremmas are. So these red dots and these here are actually Maremma locations for that same period of time. Looking at it closely, looking at individual forays with where the wild dogs have come in, like this for instance, where she's left the river, came out across there, and this is at night, and came right in and around where the sheep are. So these are hourly locations, and so while they're in the paddock with the sheep, we've highlighted the exact location of where the Maremmas were at that time. And so you can see there's actually been in the paddock for 3 hours, and at one stage been very, very close to where the Maremmas are, and possibly been chased off a bit there. And this incursion next door here, where over a space of 2 days, between the 4th and the 6th of July, this dog 83, this dingo 83, has come into the paddock. Here's where the Maremmas were at the time. Spent a couple of hours in that paddock, and then a few hours out in the paddocks adjoining, and then spent 4 or 5 hours in the paddock with the sheep up here, during which time the Maremmas hardly moved, but were in the paddock with the sheep. And I think when we first considered this project, we were thinking that Maremmas kept dingoes away and basically excluded them from the paddocks where the sheep were. But from the satellite tracking, we find that's not the case at all. The dingoes are literally coming in and foraging, and at times for several hours of a night in the paddock with the sheep. However, they're not interacting, certainly not interacting closely with the Maremmas, and the Maremmas are hardly moving at all during the time that they're in there. This graph here shows you the average distance travelled by all the dingoes and all the Maremmas during a 24-hour period. So you're looking here at dusk through the night to midnight, and then back again to dawn and through the daytime. You see that there's a very obvious peak in activity just before and after dusk, and a bigger peak of activity just before dawn and shortly after. The interesting thing to note, though, is that in terms of the activity of Maremmas through the night, that is when they're moving the least. And what we found in the brief few times that we've been out spotlighting Maremmas at night to see what they're doing is that they're bedded down with the sheep, and when you approach and sort of stress the sheep, the sheep are kept packed in a tight mob with the Maremmas with them. Meanwhile, if you look at the activity of dingoes, well, they're obviously very, very active through the night and in the early hours of the morning. So when the Maremmas are actually mostly in the paddocks with the sheep through the night time, we've had twice as many locations at night as we had in the day. While the dingoes are active, moving around and foraging and probably chasing kangaroos and things in the sheep paddock, the sheep and Maremmas are practically stationary and are not moving. That's very interesting to find out. So in terms of the results from Dunluce, we recorded 864 hourly locations of dingoes in the paddocks with the sheep, or in the adjoining paddocks where the sheep and Maremmas are. So out of five dingoes, that is an enormous amount of time over the space of 7 months to be in amongst the sheep. One of those one of those dingoes spent almost 20% of his time was in that area where the sheep and the Maremmas were. And while they spent sometimes hours and even days at a time out in this open grassland country and in the paddocks, you know, with and next to where the sheep and Maremmas were. As I said, they're active both day and night. We recorded twice the locations at night as they were in the daytime. And there wasn't a lot of overt sort of information that would suggest that they're actively chasing dogs off, dingoes off through the night. But it appears that they remain with the sheep and lead them away from any wild dogs during the day. And so they're basically stopping the interaction between dingoes and sheep. One of Ninian briefly mentioned about Nunzio, and remember from that earlier image I showed where he's in a paddock probably about 4 kilometres away from the nearest Maremma, other tag Maremma that we had. So we discovered that Nunzio died on the 22nd, 23rd of April in sort of midnight, and after we recovered this female's collar back off her, we discovered that on that same 24-hour period that this black and tan dingo had come right in, and that they would be within a few metres of each other through that night. And Nunzio died just a few hours after that. And so it appears that this female, and she almost certainly would have had another, in the mid-July, she would have had other adults with her, because she would have either been heavily pregnant or heavily lactating in the middle of July. That there's circumstantial evidence that there's been a group of dingoes come into that paddock, and Nunzio, as a 10-year-old plus sort of Maremma, has defended the sheep, but it's cost him his life. Having said that, I understand that Ninian's also found freshly killed dingoes in a paddock where Maremmas were. But what this highlights is that to get the best results out of guarding dogs, you really need to follow the best practice guidelines, and Ninian gave you a thumbnail sketch of those in terms of bonding and how they're managed. This manual here that's been prepared by Linda Van Bommel is available either through the Invasive Animal CRC, and you'll get that from their website, or it can also be downloaded from the Biosecurity's website. But it's very important to follow those recommendations. And an example of that is this year we worked on a property in central West Queensland where, in a number of respects, they don't follow the best practice guidelines, in that they didn't bond their Maremmas with the livestock. They believed that the Maremmas were bonded to the property and knew where the property was. And what we found from tracking those is that here's all the Maremma collared data here, and here's eight dingoes that we had collared on the property. And so this property here, Stratford, is largely unprotected at all. Like the Maremmas hardly get any more than a couple of kilometres away from the house, and not doing anything in terms of, or would appear not doing anything in terms of protecting their cattle. And so that just highlights the importance of following the sort of the recommendations. So what we've found in the last couple of years of research is that Maremmas aren't preventing wild dogs from foraging in and around the livestock. They certainly come into the paddocks and spend some hours there at a time. They primarily protect their livestock by guarding and preventing the interactions, not necessarily killing and chasing off wild dogs. There's certainly evidence that they cooperatively assist each other, and we suspect that that happens when they respond to barking at night. And my thoughts on the floating Maremmas is that they are those that probably respond to the barking of other dogs, the neighbouring dogs, and come to assist and boost some numbers when they're under pressure from wild dogs. So that's in brief what we've found in the last while.
All right, thanks, Lee. Any questions for Lee? If you'd like to raise your hand or type them into the question box. Any questions from anyone? Ninian, there's a couple of questions still from your presentation. I'll just bring them back up. And
Yeah.
There's Mark Auden was asking just if you could talk us through the bonding procedures and what you do there. If there's anything more to cover.
Yeah, I think the bonding starts with the day the pups are born. Well, not so much the bonding, but imprinting. And the pups, before their eyes are open, need to be, in a paddock with some livestock and, maybe sleeping on a sheepskin or something. So that bit of initial sort of sensory perception that they get is livestock orientated. From when the pups are weaned at about 8 weeks of age, up until probably 6 or 7 months. 7 months probably is being I would think fairly ideal. They're either in a small paddock, was what we try and do, 5-acre paddock or something with a handful of sheep, cattle, whatever it is, whether it's horses or chooks or whatever that you want to bond them with, but and maybe even a smaller area as well where they can be penned up at night or just given a bit more intensive enclosure. But that's for the, say 8 weeks up to 5 or 6 months old or something. Then what we've done, and I'm not saying this is the be-all and end-all, but the right thing to do, what we've done is bring the animals into the sheep yards. We put them in a pen that's probably 3 metres by 10 metres or something, and they might have a bigger yard you could let them out into. But they've more or less got to lie on each other. They're really intensive sort of bonding with, say, 8 or 10 sheep and 2 or 3 pups. And that process, I think, takes a few weeks. Or one of my thoughts on that is how long does that take? It takes as long as it takes for them to be bonded, and sometimes it might take longer than with some pups and with others. But I think 3 or 4 weeks of that, and we've tended to either during that process or just at the end of that process, at say 7 months of age, most of the Maremmas, males and females, are sexually mature enough to be desexed. So we do that, and they have a bit of time off while they've got their stitches in, and by the time they take the stitches out, you might let them out into a lane with that little mob in and out, and maybe just check that they are sort of dedicated to them and staying with them, and if they're not, you put them in and keep them going a bit longer, and just stage them out into a bigger mob, or maybe bring a few extra sheep in and blend the original ones in with those, and then maybe pick the whole bang lot up and put them in a truck and take them out and drop them in a big mob somewhere. Don't know what the best answer is, or bring a mob in and then walk them all out to their paddock. But that's what we do.
All right, very good. There's a question from Guy Newell again. All right, Guy.
Yeah, g'day, Lee. Just wondering, you said that the Maremmas, you thought, might lead the sheep flocks away from the wild dogs when they do come into their paddocks. Do you have hard evidence of that, or is that sort of an anecdotal thing?
It's mostly anecdotal from what we've seen through the day in being in and around the Maremmas, what I've noticed is just how quiet the sheep become in Maremmas, and then when you've sort of approached and the dogs bark at you, they will gradually sort of just drift off and take the sheep away from you. There's a website, Wisconsin Television, and if you go to there, I think they call it, it's called Wolves. If you Google Wolves of Wisconsin, there's a series of short videos on wolves. But about the fourth video in that program, there's a story about Maremmas in Wisconsin dealing with bears, wolves, coyotes, and foxes in a paddock of sheep over there. And there's some really interesting footage in that as the sheep are brought into a new paddock. One of the Maremmas sort of holds the sheep up, and they say the other Maremma goes and sort of has a quick look around the paddock, and then sort of almost okays, and then the sheep will follow the Maremmas in, and it's certainly captured on video there that that the Maremmas lead the sheep away from predators, or certainly make sure there's none there before they're brought in.
All right, thanks, Lee.
All right, thanks, Guy. Thanks, Lee. Ninian, there's a question talking about dogs with the wildlife. How do they go with wildlife on the property? Do they tend to leave it alone?
Is asking me.
Yeah.
Look, I suspect.
Lee, it was for Ninian, the question, sorry.
Okay.
My observation, Lee might have some observations as well, but kangaroos, or sort of marsupials in general, I suppose, our property had not a big infestation, but reasonable numbers of roos. You'd see mobs of 20 and 30 and that sort of thing. After about 3 years of Maremmas, we could drive all day and not see one. And we were starting to, and you'd see mobs of 2 or 3 if you did. So I think over about a 3-year period, they chased them enough, and we found the odd dead one, but they just chased them away, and they left them in numbers that were very acceptable to us. So that's the marsupial side of things. And pigs, I think maybe the same. We seem to see a void of pigs, although the pigs have come back in this last 12 months, as have foxes, and I've seen more foxes this year than I've seen in the last most of the rest of my life, I think. And I don't know whether that's the fact that maybe there are less wild dogs about in amongst our sheep, even though there's a hell of a lot out around everywhere, but whether the foxes have found a little haven to come to, I'm not sure. But I don't know what other wildlife you mean, but those are the ones that I've observed. They've certainly reduced our kangaroo numbers a lot.
All right, thank you. Question, Ninian, how do you train your Maremmas to fences? I guess how do they deal with it?
We don't. I suppose the bonding paddocks, we have an 8-wire electric fence. We actually, on the pups, I suppose we do a little bit of training just so that we can keep all our breeding animals stay inside those 8-wire electric fence, 5 and 10 acre paddocks, and the pups stay in there. If the pups start to wander through, we'll use a bit of electrical conduit, 3/4 conduit, make a triangle out of that with tie wire, and zippy tie that to their collar, and that will, it's a bit like the old stick on a dairy cow, sort of hold them up, and hopefully they'll get a zap from the electric fence. And that's worked extremely well for pups to understand that that's their territory when they're little. But we don't expect mature dogs to be fenced in, otherwise we'd have dingo fences around our property everywhere. So we don't try and fence the dogs in. The bonding to the livestock is their control. and because we have a lot of 1- and 2-wire electric fences too, and as well as conventional fences, we don't expect the Maremmas to be fenced once they're mature dogs.
Righto. Question for Ninian again. What method do you use to chastise pups if they are being rough with their bonding animals?
A loud shout sometimes works. I have used an electric collar, but I don't like it. But yeah, just a shout generally gets their attention, and they know your tone of voice pretty well. To me, that's worked all right.
Righto. There's also a question just about what type of boundary fence we'll keep in Maremmas, but as you said, you don't like to keep them in one area as far as fences.
Wild dog fence? Wild dog barrier fence? I don't know. But yeah, maybe 6-wire electric fences with, and if you really wanted to, to keep them fenced in, using that triangle setup I spoke about. They're about, we have smaller ones for pups and bigger ones that we do put on adult dogs from time to time when we want to, if we have an injured one and we want to keep it in the 5 or 10 acre paddocks, and we might just stick a triangle on them so that to be sure they stay in, and that is an 8-wire fence, but you'd probably do it with a 6-wire electric fence with the second bottom live wire. They tend not to jump. When we're bonding in the sheep yards, it's only a normal sheep yard fence, and very few of our Maremmas I've ever seen jump over a sheep yard fence. They tend to want to go underneath or through something. For some reason, jumping doesn't seem to be a main part of it, even though they could probably do it quite easily because they're a big dog, but they tend not to want to jump a fence.
All right, very good. That's about all the questions. Is there any further questions from anyone? If you either raise your hand or type them into chat box. There's no one here. My neighbours always bait. How far do they travel? Lee or Ninian, have you got any comments on that? How far do they travel?
My comment would be sometimes they do travel too far and get a bait. I don't know the answer to that, but I think we probably have lost some from time to time that might have gone off next door, tracking something and whatever, and got a bait. But I don't know, Lee, you might have more thoughts on that.
From the satellite tracking of the Maremmas, there were some Maremmas that ended up 13, 14 kilometres away from the paddock where they're supposed to have been, but in all cases they've just moved between other paddocks of Maremmas and sheep. There's been no sort of foray where they sort of left the area or gone into neighbours' property or into paddocks away from the sheep.
Righto, thank you. That's about all the questions I can see for the moment. Is there any further questions from anyone? If you'd like to raise your hand or type them in. If that's it, then I'd like to thank Lee Allen and Ninian for their presentations today. It's much appreciated for your time and having to talk to some producers about what is involved as far as the guardian animals. We're not trying to say that this is the only way as far as controlling predators. This is just one of the tools that producers can use. So there's in no way we're trying to push the guardian animals or Maremmas. We're just trying to get information out about what's involved, and this is just another tool for people to use in their fight against predators. Ninian, there's one more question. As far as baiting, you're obviously still involved in the Shire baiting program, as you said, so you still bait around the outside, do you?
Well, we work in with neighbours that bait, and we have 30-odd kilometres frontage to the Flinders River, and we have 2 neighbours there that bait every time, and yeah, we just work in and coordinate with them. That yeah, we don't actually do it ourselves. But yeah, so we do have a baiting of our boundaries to the north. But yeah, it's something I would like to be able to do, as I mentioned. But I don't think if you've got free-range dogs, and you know, as Lee has shown how much they do travel, that you know, baiting really is just not an option. It's probably one of the biggest sticking points of you know, sort of integrating you know, some guardian dogs in amongst you know, baiting programs, and you know, unfortunately guardian dogs get baited from time to time, and it's, yeah, sort of, it's I don't know what the definite answer to that is, but yeah, but Lee and I did speak at one stage of you could set up a barrier of properties that you know, had guardian dogs in, but then again his research is showing that they may travel through that anyway. So yeah, I don't know.
Just a comment on that. At the moment, the only alternative you have is 1080 in terms of poisons, and one of the several unfortunate characteristics about that is it's got a long latent period before it shows, you know, a dog that's ingested it shows any symptoms, and then in the toxic vomitus is one of those symptoms. Some of the alternative poisons that are in the pipeline with the APVMA registration, where there's going to be either a very quick death with cyanide, so it'll be, you know, within a few minutes, or where there's an antidote that you can use on domestic dogs. It's going to allow some flexibility, you know. For instance, you know, when Ninian brings the dogs up to the homestead where the sheep being sheared or crushed and that sort of stuff, and there's a week or so window where there's not going to be any Maremmas out in the paddock. Conceivably, you could use ejectors with cyanide or something like that, or PAP, and then remove the baits in, straight away, or remove the ejectors after that. So that, you know, there's possible that in the next year or two there will be some flexibility, and you might be able to work some of those things in. But at the moment, 1080 is just not a good chemical to be using where you expect to take dogs shortly after.
Righto, thanks a lot for that, Lee. Once again, I'd like to thank Ninian and Lee for their presentations today, and we'll wrap this webinar up now as it's 2 o'clock. There's a couple of websites on the screen there, Leading Sheep website and also Invasive Animal CRC website, which you can find further information. And I'd like to thank Leading Sheep and once again the two presenters.